Hello, everyone. It's so good to see you again. This is Friday, August 14th, somehow in the year 2020. And if it's Friday, it's another Ask Me Anything webinar from experienced investigators. And this week, we're doing things a little differently. We have an amazing roundtable for you. I reached out to 4 of my CX buddies, and they are experts in their own right. And we talked about trust. And so we're going to just chat about that with our own questions, but of course, we're also looking for your questions. So as always, feel free to drop your questions in the chat as we go, and let us know what questions do you have as we go through this topic of how do we build trust in this time of 2020, in the time of COVID and recovering and all of the things that have happened. So customer trust is something that, of course, is near and dear to all of us, and I can't wait to get started. First of all, just to remind everybody here, we do these every week, so please feel free to sign up for our reminders at bit.ly/CXweekly. We are here to answer your questions and find out what is on your mind. So if you are joining us, please let us know where you're joining us from. That's always great to hear. And let us know what you'd like to know about trust or anything else, really. This is a great panel that we're going to get a lot out of. So having said that, I want to remind everybody that, David is here with us. David, you want to say hi?
Hello. I'm the guy hiding behind the logo right now. And we've got our panelists here as well. Jeannie, do you want to introduce them?
I do. Let me get there. So today's guests, we have an amazing panel for you that we're going to be getting into. First, we have Stephanie Thum, who is a CCXP, and she is the principal of Practical CX. So you can find her there. All of them have given us permission to ask you to invite with them on LinkedIn or all the other methods here that we have. We also have Annette Franz, who's also a CCXP. She is with cxjourney.com. That's her company. She's also the chairperson of the board for the Customer Experience Professionals Association this year. And Ingrid Lindberg, who is Chief Customer. She has an amazing background in holding Chief Customer Officer roles at many different organizations with an emphasis on healthcare. And Karyn Furstman, another CCXP, who is with Rational CX. So we have this amazing group to talk about this amazing topic today. And it looks like we have some of our regulars joining us along with some new people. So it's great to see you all. So the first thing that I wanted to do was kind of introduce this topic as we go. And so when we talk about what is trust, what are we really talking about? Well, trust is a core factor in the future of customer experience, because if you don't have trust with your customers, then how do you actually deliver what they want? How do you make sure that you are listening to them in the way that they can be honest and straightforward? How can you be honest with your customers if they don't feel like they can trust you? So knowing that, this is really an interesting time right now, to put it mildly. We have disrupted supply chains. We have employees working from home unexpectedly and in many cases indefinitely at this point. So all of these factors that were together to really deliver on trust are starting to be really disrupted and will continue to be. And then there's also this fact that we don't have as many in-person experiences. So we can't build that trust in the traditional kind of more emotional ways of looking somebody in the eye and really delivering for them in person. So we have to look at this a little differently moving forward. How can we build that trust? And how can we avoid the things that actually erode that trust as well? Because customers still want experiences that will provide exactly what they need and when they need it and in the way that they expect. So if you think about how consistency is part of trust, if you are consistently expecting that package at your door from Amazon, let's say, because I don't know, I get a lot of them. I don't know about you guys. But then all of a sudden that pattern is disrupted. That starts chipping away at the trust. Can I trust that when I order the 2-day shipping, it's going to arrive? Now, that's just one example of what we are dealing with right now, but that type of inconsistency, that type of disruption, we have to remember that that's chipping away at the trust that we've already built with our customers as well. And so what can CX leaders do to build trust with customers in the coming months in this world that we know we're living in? This is the question that I posed to my friends here. We developed a blog about it, and I thought, well, this content is so good, we need to talk about it. So that's what we're going to talk about today. And we invite your questions as we go through this so that we can refer to those as well. So with that, I would love to get started with our guests and with this roundtable discussion.
Hey, everybody. We've already got some great questions coming in through the chat, so keep those coming. We will get to those definitely very soon. But first, I just want to throw out that big question. How do we build trust for the remainder of 2020 and looking beyond? And Ingrid is immediately to my left or right, depending on how you think of things. So let's throw it to you first, Ingrid, and then we'll get everybody's input.
Oh, how do you build? That's not a fair, that's the biggest question of the day, David. You can't say, how do you build trust?
It's just to solve all the world's problems. Once you're done with that, could you also tell us how to create world peace? And then
Totally. So first of all, hi, Jeannie. Hi, David. Hi, ladies. It's so good to see everybody. So thanks for the invite. It's always delightful. I have a lot of work that I've done on trust because I worked in one of the least trusted industries in America for almost 15 years. So the 3 least trusted industries in America are big oil, tobacco, and healthcare. Scary. So we can do this all day long, but we're not going to do that. So one of the things that I've kind of consistently held on to was a model that we built years ago that we lovingly refer to as the trust triangle, that really, frankly, just talks about what are the steps that you have to go through to build trust, right? What are the steps you have to build, or you have to go through to build trust? And we can talk about that as we go through today, but I'll frame it, at least to start, as I see so many companies who will talk about the newfangled, amazing thing that they're offering, yet they can't actually do their base job correctly, right? Whether it is, I don't answer the phone, my website isn't functional, I didn't do the thing that you paid me to do. Jeannie was talking about delivery. I think about the massive trust explosion we saw several years back with the Takata airbags, right? I paid you to put an airbag in my car that would protect me, and that didn't work. And so, as we go through today, we'll talk about a lot of those things, but I think at the base of all of this, or at least what I've learned at the base of all of this, is that it's about actually doing the thing that you promised every single time repeatedly, right? Every single time repeatedly. It's like a ladder that you're climbing up, right? You have to be easy to work with. You have to be helpful in your information and your interactions. And you actually do have to do it every single time. That repeatability, that reliability, right? It's a relationship. If you tell me you're going to be at the house at 10, I expect you at the house at 10, right? If you tell me that you're going to deliver this thing on time, I expect it to be delivered on time. But I'll stop there for now. Otherwise, I will talk about trust triangles all day long, and that's not fair, David.
Ingrid, I was late that one time, and you just won't let it go.
5 minutes early is on time. On time is late.
Right.
That's somebody had a military parent.
Let's throw it over to Karyn now. What's your take? How can you solve the problem of customer trust?
And everything Ingrid said, I completely it's called brilliant at the basics. And I think now more than ever, customers are it's table stakes. And if you don't do that, you're going to lose trust immediately. The other thing that I think about in terms of trust in these times, and as we have a new world that we're living in, I would say one component is truthfulness. Be honest with me and be transparent and be vulnerable, right? If you don't have the answer, tell me and tell me when you're going to get back to me. Another thing I think about building trust is, and this is true in times of pandemic and otherwise, it goes around jargon. How many times have you heard companies say to you, well, our supply chain is doing X, Y, and Z? talk in language that I understand and help me to solve my problem and say, we will get back to you, again, back to the reliability, but don't talk to me in terms that you're using in your organization, because I need to understand how you're going to help me and how you're going to help my problem. So back to the consistency, the reliability, I'd add truthfulness around having my back, being vulnerable, and talk to me as a customer and take care of me.
Yeah,
Beautiful.
sorry,
Go
I
ahead.
want to jump in and add to that, because I think the truthfulness thing, we sometimes kind of act like that's, of course, everybody's being honest. And I think, we've learned that's not always the case. And not only that, but if we can model that within our employee experience, within our internal communications, within all of those things, I think that can go a really long way as well, because we've all been in those situations. And some of this is coming out more and more with some of the social justice things and other things. Employees are saying, yeah, that's a really nice statement that you put out, but that's not the experience inside the organization. And I think the same thing can be said about truthfulness. And it's easy to overlook. It's easy to assume that everybody's behaving in this way. But if you don't explicitly state it, just like you talked about, Karyn, then I think that there is a risk that people kind of shrug and say, we don't even have to talk about that because it's not an issue, when it could be. And if the internal experience and the outside experience don't line up, that's a disconnect, and that causes a loss of trust as well.
Yeah, and you see that today when you're talking to customers. I was talking to somebody on the transportation department website. I was chatting with them. They're in their home with their kids, and they're saying, hey, excuse me, my kids are, here's a customer service representative helping me saying, I'm doing this with my kids. I'm sorry. I apologize. I really honored that. And I respected the fact that they were being honest, and you got to see that part of them in terms of their honesty.
Mm-hmm.
I want to call out a couple comments here in the chat that I love. Jackson says, vulnerability has been huge during this time. People appreciate honesty and transparency.
Mm-hmm.
We've also got a comment from Claire here that it's all about actions, not words. So be careful with the words and set the right expectations. And then one more comment that I really like. This one is from Morris. Morris says, ask simple questions based around how you decide to trust friends. I like that sort of comparison of, well, who do we actually trust in our personal lives, and why do we trust them? And why not use those same principles in our branding?
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
So Annette, let's hear from you. What are your thoughts on this giant question that we've decided to answer today?
Well, first of all, I thought you were going to call on me last. I was like, oh, sorry, Stephanie, you're going to be in a tough position. It's already hard enough that I've had 3 brilliant women trying to answer this question before me. So I'll just say what they said. Okay. I'll add to it, I promise. So I think, and speaking of promise, this is where as a company, as a brand, we start, right, with the brand promise, right? Setting expectations, making that promise and really delivering on it every day. And that leads to predictability, and that leads to that consistency and reliability that I think Ingrid and Karyn have both mentioned that. I would say, do what you say you're going to do. And I think we've already addressed that in a lot of different ways too, that that's integrity, and that, builds trust as well. And then always have customers' best interests at heart. There's so many companies that are still focusing on, maximizing shareholder value, which is an outcome. But if we put the people first, the numbers will come. And if we put the people first and we really show that we're caring about our people, and I'm just going to throw in here too, that this isn't just about customer trust, it's also about employee trust too. So I think we ought to address that at some point during the conversation as well. But having our people's best interests at heart always, and really taking care of them. There's a statistic out there right now when everything that we're talking about today is not just about the pandemic, but in business always, right? But there's a statistic out there right now that customers prefer to do business with brands, employers who are taking care of their employees, putting employee safety and health first. And it's weird to read that statistic for a variety of reasons, because, we should always be taking care of our people regardless. And so I think that builds trust as well. So that's my addition to it. I agree with everything that Jeannie and Ingrid and Karyn have already said. But I'll just add that on top of that we ought to make sure that we're talking about people in general too, not just customers, but our employees and our vendors too, and our partners.
And we've got a comment from Michelle here. I think that came out right around the time that you mentioned employee experience and employee trust, Annette. So you are on the same page. Michelle says, we need to rebuild employee trust as well in order to strengthen the external customer trust. A strong correlation. Definitely.
Yeah, I think I had I wrote a post about this, and I'm just trying to pull it up here because I had a couple of these here there was sort of this whole, stream of, right, the customer needs to, the company needs to trust the customer needs to trust the company. I'll give you a good example. You guys know Chris Zane from the Zane Cycles, right? And how he built trust into his customer experience, right? He's selling $4,000 bikes, right? And, where everybody else is asking for a deposit or whatever it is to go and take the bike out, he wasn't doing any of that. He chose to trust customers, and that really built, and in doing that, that created a really strong relationship, and he's built his brand around that. And, and he's only lost, I think in all these years, only lost 1 or 2 bikes by doing that. So just really trusting your customers too. So it's a two-way street. I think that's important to remember too.
Annette, if I might add to that, I think some examples of companies or industries that have been doing things without even asking, right? Like the insurance companies stepped up and said, we're going to give you your premium back. You didn't have to ask for that. It was that whole idea of actions speak louder than words. They jumped in and said, we're going to do that. The banks and some of those, I know they weren't on your top 3, Ingrid, but banks and insurance companies sometimes have that opportunity to show their customers that they care and are reliable. And I think those are examples of not just saying, we're here for you. I mean, how many times did we hear, we're here for you, as opposed to do something that I don't expect and take care of me. So I think that's another example in times of crisis where some industries have stepped up, which has been really great.
Mm-hmm.
And I would just add that not all of them in that industry, because I've had opposite experiences.
Not all.
There's got to be, there's always an exception or two, right? So,
all right. Well, Stephanie has been quietly planning her brilliant response over here this entire time. So I want to give her an opportunity. Stephanie, what do you have to say about all of this?
And by the way, shout out to Michelle, who just sent us a comment, another brilliant customer experience person who's been in the profession for a really long time. So thanks for that comment, and hello to Michelle. So I think one of the things that we're really picking up so far is that this is not a simple concept. Trust is not a simple concept. There are no easy or simple answers or prescriptions for building trust. But it's important to understand that trust is really at the heart of what makes an experience for a customer. But it's not a simple concept. And it's not, as Karyn, Annette, Ingrid, and Jeannie have all pointed out, it's not just about one thing, and it's also not just a data security thing. That's another dimension where we've been talking a lot about trust lately. But I think one of the things that's really important to do from a practical perspective is to make sure that, especially right now, as Jeannie pointed out early on, this transformative time that we're in has pushed digital transformation, for example, to an accelerated pace. Make sure that your intentions are matching with your customers' perceptions. You can be going 90 miles an hour or faster and trying to create great experiences in this, to use that tired expression, new normal or next normal. But if your customers' perceptions are not matching with your intentions, then there's a risk to erode trust. So we're talking about multiple dimensions, lots of different ways to think about this. But if we're at least thinking about it and thinking about the many dimensions of trust, then I think we're on the right track.
Yeah, that's great. And I would add to that, I love thinking about it in those terms, as well as thinking about it in the terms that somebody brought up, like, what makes you trust a friend? We can apply those same things. I mean, we all have that friend who makes plans and always cancels. And after a while, you're like, okay, yeah, whatever. I'll see you on Friday. Sure. And it erodes the trust that things are going to happen. So, if you look back on, your last 30 to 60 days as an organization and you think, okay, we've had all these disruptions, we've had all these delays, we've had problems getting our contact center agents set up from home, so that's caused a whole different thing. I mean, that is flaking out on your customer, frankly, just like that friend. And so what do you need to do to repair that trust? What do you need to do to build that trust again? And part of that is if you haven't earned loyalty, then it's a lot harder to be forgiven. So I'm kind of curious about the idea of forgiveness in this aspect too. And I'm just curious what you guys have to say on how do you rebuild trust and how do you earn that forgiveness as an organization with customers?
What is that saying about trust being earned in drops and lost in buckets?
Yeah, that's a great way to say it.
Yeah, I think that applies more than ever now.
Mm-hmm.
I'd love to hear what everybody else has to say, but I keep going back to that, what I heard about that a long time ago, and I think that applies now more than ever before.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
I agree. And I think it starts with an apology, an acknowledgement. It's sort of that openness and the transparency that Karyn mentioned. I think it starts there. And a lot of times companies will just let it slide or whatever. They don't address it. And if you don't address it, then it's like, well, are they stupid? Do they not realize what they've done? Or those kinds of things. So really it starts with an apology, and then you've got to go back through and you've got to build and earn it all over again. But that's my 2 cents on that.
And Ingrid, you're probably more qualified to talk to this than I am, but so I'd be curious what you think about it. But I've heard that malpractice suits actually go down if the doctor acknowledges that something went wrong, and that they've been advised for years never to say anything about fault or apology. And once they started experimenting with that, they found those rates actually went down.
Yeah, it's so amazing. There's a children's hospital that I've done a lot of work with, and this is a horrible topic in the middle of a Friday, but it is very pertinent, right? And they were suffering a lot of malpractice lawsuits because when you have a child who dies, there's almost a 1-to-1 correlation when a child dies in a hospital to a malpractice lawsuit. And so we started doing things and work to reimagine what the experience could look like, not because we wanted to stop malpractice lawsuits, because that's a outcome we knew we could also solve. But we started doing things like allowing parents in the room when team members were trying to resuscitate children. Because historically you remove the parent from the room, trying to protect the parent, right? Because you want to try to protect the parent from seeing something that could be pretty horrible. And what we were able to actually see, which just will make sense to everyone, but I think it's such a profound example, is when a parent can see the amount of just guts and glory that go in from a team trying to save a child, they very rapidly have a different relationship and a much more trusted relationship with a physician they might have known for 5, 10, 15 years, right? That moment is such a key moment. So we did a lot of work on how do you actually let people see the dirty sides of things. And I think that can apply far beyond a hospital practice, right? But letting people see the really dirty stuff sometimes actually helps in that truth telling, right? We talk an awful lot about, do a lot of work with CEOs who are running companies that are having some problems. It's kind of my sweet spot. And one of the first things I always have them do is do a big mea culpa, right? I have them stand up in front of their employees and say, I made a bunch of mistakes. Here are the mistakes that I made. I'm not going to make those mistakes anymore. And I think it's such a correlation to that just human connection, right? We are messy mortals. And the more you let other people see that you're a messy mortal, back to Karyn's example of, you're talking to someone from the Department of Transportation and the kid's running around. Yeah, of course there's a kid running around right now. That creates humanity, that creates connection, that creates trust, right? Let people see the messiness. Don't try to hide it.
Wow, that example gave me chills. And I think it speaks to the transparency and the vulnerability that we're okay seeing. But you think about how business people are trained, like how to, yeah, exactly. So formal. And you think about how physicians are trained. I mean, they're scientists, right? And we probably don't spend enough time talking about vulnerability and how that actually builds trust throughout the relationship.
Well, and Karyn, I'm going to go back to something you said, and we'll throw this out to the team. So I, once again, way too many years in healthcare, right? And there is one of the things that we learned when studying trust in healthcare was that over 80% of Americans thought that healthcare ecosystem, so pharma, health insurance, your doctors, everyone in the ecosystem purposefully used really fancy language to hide things from me, right? So I've spent many, many years taking really complex stuff down to just human language, which, by the way, 86% of Americans read at a 5th grade level and makes their best decisions at a 5th grade level, right? So 5th grade, regardless of industry, guys, doesn't matter how educated you are, doesn't matter how smart you are, it's how we process best. But you just think if we started talking to each other like you would talk to your buddy at the baseball game or like you would talk to someone at a coffee shop, just imagine the level of relationship we could actually create with customers and our teammates, right? I mean, we obscure so much with fancy language to make ourselves feel better. Mm-hmm. It's a big one, Karyn. You're totally right.
Yeah. Jeannie, I think your question about rebuilding trust again is really a complex one, right? Because we know in the CX world that sometimes that service recovery can actually earn more loyalty in the long run, right? Like there's data around that shows that those moments are actually your heroic moments when you recover. But I think when you have broken trust somehow, and you even think about it in a personal relationship, that's a longer road to get back to. And I think that absolutely, I mean, Annette and Ingrid, starting out with the apology and say, sorry, we screwed up. I'm human. And so much, I mean, that takes you a certain percent of the way, right? But to actually get that trust back again as a customer, I think is a little bit longer of a journey. And you need to really earn that right to get back to that position again, which may take a while. So I think it's a really interesting question how do you re-earn that if you have broken that trust.
And I think that sometimes, sorry, go ahead.
Oh, I was just going to say actions speak louder than words. When my kids will apologize for something, right? I'll just say, you know what? That's great. Thank you. But change your behavior, right? And then 2 hours later, they're apologizing for the same thing again, right? So, and if brands are doing that, if they keep on making the same missteps, you've got to just make sure that your actions speak louder than your words. Apologize, but man, do something with it. This is sort of the root of CX and the root of VOC and the root of all that, right? If you're going to listen and you hear it, then go do something about it, right? So.
Yeah, I was just going to add that some of the words that we kind of throw around in CX, we forget the emotional weight of them to the customer. And one of those is disappointed. Like if a customer says to you, I'm so disappointed, that's an emotional response. And that's related directly to trust. I trusted you to do something and you didn't do it, or you didn't do it in the way that I was promised. That's a real emotional thing. And I think sometimes we say like, how do we not disappoint customers instead of thinking about how do we build this relationship around trust so that when we do hear those things, we take it really seriously and we take steps to rectify it.
So on the topic of trust and how we get feedback and use that, Stephanie, in the blog for this week, you had said that it's your dream to one day have a metric that that's as commonplace as NPS, Net Promoter Score, but measures trust. And we've actually got a lot of questions in the chat as well on how we actually measure those trust levels. Jeannie, you sort of alluded to emotional language, but I want to highlight this question from Jackson and then throw it out to Stephanie and everybody. What are some good ways to measure trust? And do you believe that there are genuine questions we can ask in a survey that doesn't put the customer in a hot seat? How can we measure this?
Yeah, so Ingrid mentioned early on about the industries that suffered from a lack of trust. And I spent 4 years in the CX leaders role for a federal government agency, which is kind of in one of those industries with plummeting trust. So I completely get it and have been thinking about and writing about trust for a really long time. But on that note, with respect to how do you ask and what do you ask? And, if you are a federal government agency, by the way, you are in luck because the White House has issued questions, and actually now mandates that high impact federal government agencies actually ask a question on trust, and it is outlined here. And I'll share it with everybody because you don't have to be a government agency in order to start measuring trust on simple scales. So here's the question that is recommended by the White House to federal government agencies. And we're just getting started in measuring trust. So this is just a starting point. So eventually it will be an oversimplification, but they're recommending that all agencies have an overall trust score on a simple scale. Just on a simple scale that asks the question, this interaction increased my trust in name of program or name of service, or I trust name of organization to fulfill its commitment to me. Just starting with some simple measures like that, I think is great just to get started. Now, eventually, you're probably going to want to grow that and change it and then do different things with the insights. But just to get started, those are some places to think about.
I'm going to add, because in the article that we collaborated on, I referred to an article from Marketing Magazine from 1999. So this is, and the entire magazine is about growing the trust relationship. And in there, they offer up some questions to ask, right? And I'll just share the ones that, and I added a few myself as I thought about this too, right? So the questions that they list here to ask about are, do you feel that the company cares more about you or the money in your wallet? I thought that was a good one. To what extent would you feel a sense of loss if company went out of business? If company were able to lower its costs, do you think they would? Sorry, I've highlighted in the magazine and some of the words have faded here. So, so this is a problem. I'll read it off my screen because I've got it up here as well. If we were able to lower our costs, do you think we would build trust by sharing the savings with you, or do you think we would use the savings solely to boost our profits? To what extent do you think we are sincerely concerned about your complaints? If we thought of a way to raise prices without you noticing, how inclined do you think we would be to do so? And then I added a couple of questions too. And first one I added was, if we make a mistake, do we apologize and make it right? Do we treat you the way that you want to be treated? Have we delivered on our brand promise? And are we doing so consistently? Do you believe that we put your best interests ahead of our own? And so I think being opportunistic is a real problem. And I think that some of the things that we're seeing through the pandemic, there are brands that have been opportunistic. So I think that's a real trust buster. But anyway, those were the questions that they offered up in this magazine. So I thought I'd use that sort of as a starting place to get the conversation going too.
So I want to ask a question of the group. So suppose, what do you think about this? So suppose those questions go into operations. You start using them, you start gathering that feedback. I'd be interested to hear about, what does the follow-on activity look like? What do you think it should look like? Who should be examining that data? And then what does it look like? Because these are different dimensions of questions that really haven't been asked, like to the point of the question that David asked early on. This isn't a standard thing that's asked, like in satisfaction and customer effort. It's not a standard thing anymore. So how do we need to change how we react to it? So I would toss that back out to the group. Hope that's okay.
Some of these questions asked more in, rather than sort of the post-transactional or the transactional surveys, maybe asked in relationship surveys, but do we think that some of these types of questions are asked more in marketing or marketing research, where it's sort of, it lives in that bucket, but never comes over into VOC and then laddering up to CX and how we operationalize all that?
Yeah, well, I was actually thinking. Oh, go ahead, Steph.
Oh, sorry, I was just going to say, for federal government, they're thinking about it in terms of being combined in with transactional surveys just to get started. So go ahead, Karyn.
I almost think it could live in lots of places. As you were talking about those great questions, I was thinking about the action, but I was even thinking about before, what's the leading indicator of that, right? Like when we talk about NPS, we kind of say that by the time you get those scores, you should be taking those actions. So what also would be some of the leading indicators around seeing some of those results? Like, customer attrition, some of those kinds of things, customer problems. But in answer to your question, I do think also I like the idea of perhaps the front end of the funnel. I also think even in the sales transaction, if you think about, we all know, right? Sales are absolutely lifebloods of companies, but how many times are you seeing companies make the sale to get the sale and then don't really care about what happens at the back end? And so I think some of that integrity and trust could be built into the sales discussion or follow-up as well on the front end. I do like that. I think obviously building it into all aspects in taking action, but I think that marketing and sales piece is an area where I think there could be some of those embedded questions.
I think Jackson had a really good point when Jackson asked about, how do you keep it from kind of putting the customer on the hot seat? I think that's a really good question to ask that needs to be reflected on, and maybe in which mechanisms you choose to ask for that feedback, because you want an honest answer. Right. And I think, I come from a B2B background where we did a lot of one-on-one customer interviews and client interviews. I would love to have asked that, but I think that it would have maybe made the client uncomfortable for me to ask that in a face-to-face kind of situation. And I might not have gotten that back. So that sense of mindfulness around where and when you ask that question, I think is a really good point.
And I think, this reminds me of an interview recently that Jack Dorsey from Twitter did. And he was talking about all the mistakes that they had made in the beginning. And one of the mistakes that he said was that they didn't have people who understood kind of what these numbers meant. What does that actually mean about the humans that you're serving? And so now they have social psychologists and they have all these different types of people who can really help them look at data, look at, how people are responding to their product and make some assessment over, are we gaining or losing trust here? And so it's been, I think you look at that as an example where there's such a massive group of people using that product for many, many different reasons. And they're still worried about, let's make sure that we're earning their trust every day. Opinions aside about whether they're doing that or not. But I think the act of looking at, do we have the right people here who can understand this, is a really good question as well.
To your point, Karyn, about leading indicator, does the brand have to be self-aware for some, right? I feel like some of these are just not there.
Absolutely. Right? 100%. And I think, back to the point about the industries there, you have to have self-awareness. You have to then, to your point, and I love the idea of starting to think about a metric or questions. But as we all know, being in the CX business for a while, we want to make sure that it's not just adding a metric to add a metric as well. Like, what's really going to be the thing that's going to drive, to that point before, around if it's eroding, how do I get back to that place? Or if I'd excel, even if I'm excelling at it, how do I keep that trust going? So I think it's just a real interesting idea around how you build that in, back to your point around the operations. But at the end of the day, you're absolutely right, Annette. I mean, the brand has to be understanding and vulnerable, back to that whole point on vulnerability about we need to do this, because back to, let's look at the experience gap, right? The 80% and 8%, right? They may think they're doing a great job and we're completely trustworthy, but yet our customers really feeling that.
So let me ask a question to this group about the companies that you work with or for. Are we having these conversations? Is trust coming up?
So I feel like I'm the odd man out on this one. So I'm going to jump in first, and you can totally be like, shut up, Ingrid. So we started measuring trust it's true though, right? You can always tell me to shush. So the first time I measured trust at a company was in 2002, which was probably really late. We were measuring it at Amex when I was there in the late 90s, but that wasn't part of my world. I was on the design side, not on the VOC side. So, we started specifically at a startup that I was a part of. We started measuring because we understood that we were new and we had a new name and we were a new brand. And so we understood that we had to actually be a trusted name and a trusted partner from the get-go. And I'll tell you, from a measurement perspective, like, we literally just said, do you trust the information we're giving you? Do you trust us? And do you trust that we're going to help you make the right decision? Those are the three questions we were asking back in 01, 02. As we evolved and as I've, learned more and studied more and figured things out, I've always, especially in healthcare, because I've studied the Edelman Trust Barometer for way too many years. If everybody's not paying attention to it, go pay attention to it. It's super helpful for your industry. Edelman Trust Barometer. But, literally the questions there are, do you trust the company? Do you trust the industry? And I think where I do see the conversation starting to happen more broadly now, Jeannie, to your question, is we're doing things like, did you trust your customer service representative? Which I think is the worst question in the world to ask, because 99% of the time, that's really not where the trust decision breaking point is going to be, right? That's a delivery, not the problem. And so, I'm starting to see more companies start to understand that it's about, do you trust the company? Do you trust us? Do you trust that we're making the right decision? Do you trust that we're here to help you, right? We're seeing questions like that come out of USAA. We're seeing questions like that come out of Delta. Do you trust that we're safe? I mean, it's fascinating, right? But those are kind of those macro things that I'm super excited we're starting to see more of. Although I feel like, where y'all been? We've been doing this for 20 years in healthcare. Because we were least trusted.
No, it's a fair point. It's a fair point.
Do you think that there's a risk of oversimplifying the question? Mm-hmm. Because you can ask, it seems to me that you could ask a question about, do you trust us? But do you trust what about us? Because maybe you do trust the person that you deal with every day, but your information systems, I read about that breach that you had last year, and I don't really trust that. So do you all think that there's a risk of oversimplifying how we look at or counsel on trust, or, talk to C-suites about it?
Well, I think this goes back to the self-awareness question. Mm-hmm. I think this goes back to, do you have leadership who is willing to, as I like to say, face the hard truths? Mm-hmm. Because a lot of them are not willing to do that. And, if you are in a position where you're really discussing and figuring out how do we build trust with customers, the knee-jerk reaction to Karyn's point about the experience gap, they're going to be like, we're fine. We're trustworthy.
We got it.
It's not me, it's you. And I think that, if you can get everybody kind of on board that this is a greater good we're really talking about. And Annette brought up the employee experience, which is so important. I think also discussing community trust. Mm-hmm. Is your brand trusted as a member of the community out there, not just with customers? Those are all layers that are sticky and sometimes tough to deal with, but I think we need to address it. And if we don't have the right leadership who's willing to really, look at that in an honest way, then it's hard to make change, frankly.
Yeah.
What's the word that comes out of customers' mouths? Because I don't know that I've ever heard a customer say, well, I don't trust that brand. I'm not going to buy from them. Maybe some do, but what are the words that customers use to express trust? And maybe it's not trust.
Yeah.
Jeannie said, disappointment. Disappointment. Yeah. I'm disappointed.
Yeah, I was going to say this is more of an immediate thing, but I would say that in today's the pandemic world, that trust and safety are being used somewhat synonymously, right? Like Ingrid, you brought up, that the safety issue, and I mean even Delta Airlines. But think about anything: physical locations. I want to go to a retail location. How much more do I potentially trust a restaurant that I go to that has the little stickers showing I'm 6 feet apart? That gives me a peace of mind. Or if I'm talking to a company that has my data and there's been some sort of issue, right? Like keeping my data safe. I think there's in these times, and again, this is hopefully shorter term, right? But it's that whole safety issue synonymous with trust. Not saying that necessarily should be a question per se, but I think that that's what customers in any aspect are looking for, that safety component right now.
Absolutely. Clean, contactless, privacy-centric,
right?
Inclusive experiences. The expectations have definitely changed, and that just adds to the dimension of the subject that we're talking about.
Yep. And control over my data, control over my safety, all of those things.
I love what Annette was talking about. I hope that we can go to this about more to talk about the employee experience and the role and that ripple impact to trust. Can we talk about that?
Absolutely. Go for it. You're talking about it now. Keep
No, I
going.
mean, well, of course, I want to hear what others have to say, but one of the things that I've just noticed, because I have been trying to scan the academic literature a lot more frequently, maybe than I did, say, 8 or 10 years ago, because I think there's a great amount of knowledge in the academic world that has yet to find its bridge over into the academic, I guess, into the practical world and into the practitioner world. So, I think that just in the conversations that I've had over the years, there's a tendency to think about the employee experience in terms of, does the employee trust their employer? There's a growing body of academic literature out there that I think is important to just reflect on, about how much does the employer and the manager trust the employee, and that combined relationship and its ripple impact out into the customer experience world. So, there's a lot to think about and a lot to reflect on. And I just wanted to bring that up as part of this conversation.
Mm-hmm.
It's like a present, Steph. You're like, hello, present.
No, that's just my part of this. That's just my part of this conversation. I want to hear what others have to say and what you think, and about the, because we all know, and we all, talk this talk and share experiences in counsel about the employee, the importance. Like, you cannot have a customer experience strategy without an employee experience strategy. But what does that mean? What does it look like? What does it feel like for the employer and the employee, and all of the nuances of those relationships? So I think that's worth some exploring in terms of the overarching topic of trust and customer trust, because employers have to trust employees, employees have to trust employers, and otherwise, can you even get to customer trust?
Yeah, I think it starts with the culture, right? I wrote a blog post about this, the culture of distrust, right? What happens in that culture? And I think, and I've worked with companies like this where there's a fear of recourse. The employees are micromanaged. There's all these things that just make you, for lack of a better word, make you feel icky working there, right? And I think we've probably all worked in those situations as well. And so I think it really does start with, as we always talk about with the employee experience and with the customer experience, it starts with leadership and it starts with the culture, and if those are wrong, if they've been, if the culture's been designed to be one where or allowed to be one where it's a culture of distrust, then that's a problem. And I'll just go back to, fear of recourse. That was a big one in a company that I worked with 2 years ago. And it just made people not trust their immediate managers, not even trust their coworkers, and certainly not trust the executive leadership team. So there's a lot that goes into that culture of trust.
Steph, interesting point about employer trust, and I don't know that I'd really thought about it in that respect. But if you think about the whole workforce changed, and the working from home and the working remotely, right? And what does that, the employers having to have and managers having to have that implicit trust with employees, and what that means to productivity, either positively or negatively, right? I think that it is very much a two-way dialogue. And I think that as things continue to evolve, it's got to be thought about both ways. And both of those bleed into, exactly to your point, to the customer, right?
And then to Annette's point, because there are studies that show that the technological advancements that we're working with now, where we have, tools like this and instant message and text, we can be connected in as a team within an organization. And that helps to foster a spirit and an attitude of trust. But to Annette's point, there's more to it than just tech. There are deeper cultural implications that go into this. So, there, again, no simple answers, no cookie cutter, nothing cookie cutter, but these are just the realities that we're living in right now.
And we're getting some great comments. Sorry.
I'm just going to say real quick, for the employee, it starts all the way back at the candidate experience, right? I mean, that just sets the stage for so many things. Yeah.
Oh boy, that's another whole conversation. But yeah, we're getting some great comments from our viewers here, and they're sharing some great things and questions. And I saw that Jackson mentions the seal on the door for Hilton. And that's something that I know they've been promoting a lot, not just Hilton, but other chains, where they put a seal on your door once the hotel room is clean so that you know you're the first person walking in there after it's clean. And I think we're going to get more and more creative about how we do this. One of the things that I saw was at a big high rise, they were struggling because there's a shared bathroom for an entire floor. And they were finding that too many people were going into the bathroom not knowing who was in there, and they needed an immediate solution to that. And so they actually used magnets. They gave everybody a magnet and said, when you walk in the store, just put it on the outside of the door. And so once there were 3 magnets, there was a sign saying, please wait out here if there are 3 magnets. Really elegant, simple solution. But they found that employees then were more willing to work from the office. They felt safer for such a simple little thing. But that was about providing that safety and that trust. So David, what else are we, because I know we're getting short on time here. Do we have questions to address or comments to highlight?
Yeah, so we've just got a bunch of great comments. I wish I could keep up with them. We've got people making best friends and like deciding to connect.
I love our community.
This is really, really exciting. I wanna bring it to something that Ingrid had mentioned in the blog post, and then from there we can get into some other questions. But Ingrid, in the blog post you had mentioned a variation of Maslow's hierarchy of needs, which I'm a big fan of, that you called the trust pyramid. And I'm curious, what are the levels of the trust pyramid, and how did they fit into what we've been talking about so far today?
Great. I love this conversation. It's my favorite one to have. So I'll go back to the year was somewhere in the early O's. And what we were trying to solve that we were a very distrusted industry that was trying to give life-saving, in many cases, information to consumers, right? I mean, that's really what we were trying to do. We were trying to help you quit smoking. We were trying to help you lose weight. We were trying to do a bunch of stuff. And I'll never forget, we did an enormous amount of research, ethnographic and quant and qual. I mean, we did everything. And I had this woman look at me and she said, how dare you tell me that I'm fat when you can't even pick up the phone? And so it became the basis of what we call the trust pyramid, which was built for health insurance, but we've now applied to pretty much every industry out there. And we haven't seen much variation, but just based on the hierarchy of needs, right? The first thing you need from a company is you have to have that company be easy and helpful. From the first second, from the first moment, you always have to be easy and helpful. And then you have to think of it like a ladder rung, right? And you can always slip down the ladder at any point in time. The next step is you have to be repeatable and reliable, right? You have to be repeatable and reliable every single time. Answers are the same. Things happen the same way, right? And if you aren't, you fall back down and you have to start again. Back to our conversation about how do you regain and re-earn trust. What we found, if you could consistently do those 4 things, easy, helpful, repeatable, reliable. And yes, we did survey people post-transaction, quarterly in our touch point surveys, right? So we found out lots of different ways. Were we doing those things? The next step that we actually found that people would start to do is they would start to ask us for advice. So if we did those 4 things consistently over a long period of time, it was a 12-month rolling cycle. So you couldn't fall backwards during that 12 months. If we did those things consistently, people would start asking us questions. And if we started answering questions in a way that people felt was easy, helpful, repeatable, and reliable, so they got the same answer every time, they actually started feeling like they were getting something from us. That was actually the moment that we found in health insurance that we began to earn trust. Now, that's 12 months after we've signed a contract with you. 12 months later, that's where we began to earn trust. And that was the point where we learned that at least in that sector, specifically to start, that was where we had finally earned the right to engage. We'd earned the right to tell you that you needed to stop smoking. We'd earned the right to start to give you advice on your health. And we found that it was absolutely incredible. We were able to move ourselves in our trust barometer from the lowest in the industry to the highest in the industry. It took about 3.5 years. But we literally just focused on easy, helpful, repeatable, reliable, and then knowing that most important moment was when you called us and asked us a question that wasn't about a problem. And that was our magic. And it's, it was hard work, but it was very repeatable and reliable work that we've been able to apply to a bunch of different industries.
One of the comments that I saw fly by here was from Patrice, who said that one of the comments that they look for in that language is care about me. And that seems like you just outlined how to show that in behavior and action. And so I think that's one of the, we were talking about what are the words that customers use. I think disappointment, but care about me, either you did or you didn't, are both very, very telling when they talk about trust.
Yeah, I start with know me, then care about me, right? Like know who I am and understand my situation. But I love how you explained that that pyramid, Ingrid. I think that's fantastic. It's like you have to your point, you have to earn the right before people want to go to the new shiny object all the time and say, how can we differentiate and what can we do and how can we think about things differently, but yet we don't have the basics right and we're not reliable. So you don't get to show up and do that if you don't have those basics right. Love that.
Well, and we love to upsell, right? We love to upsell on day one. Oh, you signed with us? Now buy these 15 things. And it's like, whoa, back off, right? It's kind of like LinkedIn when you get a pitch the second you connect with somebody. Whoa.
What can I do to get you in this car today? What can I get?
Right. But it's a lot of work. And I think at the end of the day, I think we have to be careful though. And so I'm going to be a little blasphemous for a second. Jeannie, we couldn't end any other way than that, right? So when we talk about know me and care about me and words like that, I would caution us to think about what industry we're talking about. Because there's a lot of industries and a lot of consumers. Like I actually don't want some people to know me. And I understand that is me because I am a person, I am me. I don't want all the companies I do business with to actually know me. There's a lot of companies I actually don't want to ever use the word care when it comes to our relationship. So I think one of the biggest things is we just have to be so thoughtful about what is the relationship we're trying to create with that person? What is the feeling of that company? What is the brand, right? So there's no one size fits all. There's just not a one size fits all, but it's, and it's also so personal. It's so personal, company to company, person to person.
And giving control is part of building trust,
right.
I think. So giving customers control over that relationship and how much they want you to know them and how they want to be addressed and all of those things, that's how we build trust as well. So that's an excellent point. It's not blasphemous. You're fine.
Back to just pivot back to the employee piece for a second too. I think I love this idea. And so many times we talk about employee engagement, employee empowerment, like those things as we measure. I think it would be interesting if that trust word started making its language into the voice of the employee somehow, right? Like, because it goes back to the same thing. I'm not going to be engaged if I don't trust you, right? And, maybe I have other choices of places to work, but maybe I don't. And so that's kind of a foundational thing. I think that could be interesting on the employee side to start building that language into some of the discussions or feedback mechanisms on the employer side.
And there were some comments about that specifically and how people were doing that. So I think there is some activity around that, which is awesome. Great. Well, we could keep doing this, but people probably have places to go. So I just want to extend huge gratitude to you guys for this thoughtful discussion, for, the collaboration around the article that we wrote together, all of those things. This is such a big, meaty topic, but I think it's one that we're going to continue to talk about moving forward. So thank you for being here. And thank you to all the fabulous people who had all these wonderful comments that, I'm going to sit down with a drink later and just go through them all and see the wisdom that flew by as we were having this conversation. So thank you for being here. To reach out to any of our guests here, Stephanie, Annette, Ingrid, and Karyn have all agreed that, they will connect if you reach out to them on LinkedIn. They're fabulous people to follow for their own content and all of those good things. And I'm just grateful that you're also my friends. So thanks for being here.
Oh, thank you.
And as always, we do these every Friday. So join us next week. I will be talking about something. I'll be talking about how to define outcomes. That's what it is for your customer experience strategy. And if you would like to provide feedback, sort of customer experience person would I be if I didn't ask for feedback? I would love your feedback on this session. If you want us to do more around guests, if you want us to invite these specific people back, of course, we would be happy to do that. So you can do that at bit.ly/letjeannieknow and fill out the feedback. Let us know any suggestions for future topics or anything like that. Thank you, as always, to David for helping produce and behind the scenes and wrangle all of us today. So I appreciate that very much. But
And
until then,
I just want to thank all the folks in the comments today. It was such a great conversation. So many great questions. I know we didn't have a chance to get to all of them in the webinar, but we've got some great questions in YouTube and in LinkedIn Live. So I expect that we'll all try to answer some of those questions that we couldn't get to in the comments afterwards. So if we didn't get a chance to answer your question, don't worry. We're working on it. We'll get there.
excellent. Yes, thank you for saying that, because they were fast and furious today too.
Yeah.
So it was hard to keep up, but you guys were providing a lot of great feedback to one another too, which is what I love about this. We create a community and help each other out. So thank you to our guests. Thank you to you.
Thanks,
and yes, thank you
Thank
guys.
you.
And we will see you. I'll see you next week. Thanks, everybody. Have a great week.
Bye.